we imagined a small room with a few people. So it's great to have so many of you join us, but we'd love to be able to see you as we're speaking. So come on up and come on in. And we'd like to get started with a word of prayer. Let's pray. Lord, we come before you this afternoon thanking you for this week of refreshment, this week of rest. Thanking you for the gift of marriage, the covenant you designed, a place you made for us to thrive as your image bearers, walking in relationship with you and walking in the strength of relationship with each other, two becoming one by your Spirit. We invite your Holy Spirit to speak to us from our thoughts to our words, to our reflections. May you strengthen each one of our marriages this afternoon and lead them to thrive as your kingdom intends. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, welcome. My name's Preston Yoder. I've been married to this beautiful woman for over 15 years. Actually, I realized the last time I was at Dayton Mennonite Church, I was here to watch my girlfriend sing in the Rosedale Chorale.
That's right.
And this was my girlfriend.
And out of those 15 years, we've been in full-time church ministry for 12, and we just have really felt God putting a passion on our hearts to work with marriages in the church, and just there's a lot of joy when you see couples learning to love each other.
And it's been a joy to do that together here and there. It's also been a joy to especially do that with fellow pastors, couples in ministry, because when you enter into marriage, every marriage has unique stresses. When you enter into ministry, then you have some shared stress points as couples who are in ministry. Because when God's call is on your life, the enemy has a target on your back. And he wants to come after church leaders and after their marriages. So we believe deeply, and we're very passionate about couples who are in ministry doing what they can to proactively protect and build the relationship that God designed. So the title of our workshop this afternoon is Building a Thriving Marriage and Ministry. You know, there's churches, there's people in your churches who you can't tell that their marriage isn't thriving until one day it just blows up. And we've seen that happen. You've seen that happen. And there's burdens like that you carry as a minister and as couples together.
As all of us in this room are people in ministry, the work that we get to do is the work of caring. And oftentimes when something tragic or heartbreaking happens for other people, you're one of the first people that they call. And so you get to kind of carry the burdens of the people in your congregations. And so the big question is, as you are in ministry and as you're carrying the burdens of other people, how do you take those burdens and cast them on the Lord in order to love and have a strong connection in your own marriage?
There's times when I realize I'm not doing this as well as I could, where I'm still carrying a weight from a meeting, from a counseling session, from something I learned, and I'm at my dinner table, and this is a symptom for me, and I want you to think, what's a symptom for you that you're carrying something that's disrupting, that's keeping your marriage, your family from thriving? This is a symptom for me. When I'm at the dinner table and my lovely wife bumps me and says, "Your daughter said something to you." Twice. And where's my head? It's still wrapped up in that meeting. It's burdened with the crisis that person's going through. It's thinking about the sermon. What's a symptom for you? That your mind is somewhere else, even when you're with the people you love and you want that connection to be there, you're missing out on them. Those little moments are important.
1 Peter 5:7 says, "Cast all your cares on the Lord, for he cares for you." And I know that all of you know that passage, but it's like when we take those burdens that we're carrying for people and we cast them on the Lord, we're not holding on to them. We're letting him carry those burdens. And the one who never sleeps nor slumbers allows us to get our rest at night while he is carrying the burdens of our congregations and all those things that are on your heart. And this isn't just a one-stop fix where we cast our burdens on the Lord and it's like, okay, we've done that and he's got it. But it's a ritual, it's a habit of consistently coming to the Lord and saying, here are the things that are on my heart. Here are the things that maybe my congregation's going through. I was just thinking about a year ago, a young man in our church was tragically killed in a car accident. And when something like that happens, it not only weighs on you, but your whole church community. And part of being in ministry is just taking that to the Lord. And like Micah said on the very first night when we were gathered together, what God gives us, he says, come to me all who you are heavy, burdened, and laden, and I will give you rest. And what God gives in exchange for that is a yoke that is light and easy.
And what we found in our marriage is that we can strengthen each other and that we can build awareness whenever we're carrying burdens that are too big, or as we like to use this picture, our emotional tank. If you could visualize a gas tank in your car, you know you're in trouble. By the way, I love those gas tanks that give you a digital readout on how far you have to go. I recently pulled into a gas station with 3 miles left to go on that tank of gas.
Oh, that reminds me, when I dropped the kids off, the gas tank is almost empty.
Are you
that
serious?
was not in our notes, but yes, I forgot to tell you. Maybe we can find one.
It's good to know. This happens. And so what I mean by that, if you visualize your heart, your emotional tank, your spiritual state, if you have poured out and been carrying heavy burdens and you come to a place of empty, that's whenever I realize I'm missing what my kid is trying to say to me, or I'm missing what she's saying to me. It's, how's your emotional tank is a question we sometimes ask each other. It's also true if you get a little snippy about something that's not a big deal, and suddenly it's like a very big deal. I don't know if that ever happens to anybody else, but if you're like, that emotional reaction on my part was out of proportion to what just happened, a good question to ask, and I'd encourage you to just keep it in mind, a tool for you. How's your emotional tank? And if we find out that our emotional tank is below 20%, 40%, it's not the time to talk everything out. The question then is, what do you need to recharge? I need to go on a run, clear my head. You fill in the blank. What's the thing that you do to connect with the Lord? I need to take time to journal and pray. I need to call a friend. I need to do something for my soul so that I can be well and build the thriving relationship and the thriving home that we want to build.
Because the reality is, everything that involves that care and that ministry does take something out of us. And when we are giving, and we're giving, and we're giving, and we come home, and the people that we care the most about, we need to ask God to fill us back up before we can continue in giving in a marriage.
Because your marriage will not thrive if you miss those little moments of connecting with each other. Those little moments of noticing what your spouse is asking for, what your spouse needs, being present. All those little moments stack up, and they can lead to a drift apart, where even marriages and ministry and pastors who preach wedding sermons and preach brilliantly about marriages, their own marriage can erode because they are not staying connected. This is why Jesus tells us in Matthew 19, 4-6, some crucial words. Haven't you read the scriptures? Jesus replied. They record that from the beginning, God made them male and female. And he said, this explains why a man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife, and the two are united into one. Since they are no longer two, but one, let no one split apart what God has joined together. You want to build a thriving marriage, then it's one that is one, it's one that's unified, it's one that's connected. And anything that's going to try to distract you from that or keep you from that is something that you want to build a system, build habits to overcome.
So today, what we want to spend most of our time on is just talking about how can we discover how to stay connected and unified through the stressors of ministry. So as you think of all the stressors or the places where you find stressors, we want to look at how can we develop the connections and the habits that keep us in a thriving marriage through the stresses of ministry.
And as you think about that, I would submit to you that if a pastor's marriage fails, a church is devastated. There's more weight there than, it's not just a family that's devastated, it's a church family that's devastated, it's a community that's devastated. So you being here this afternoon and saying, we want our marriage to thrive, thriving is the opposite of failure. You're going to do everything you can to move your marriage in the other direction. You're going to keep it. Keep that covenant you've made with all seriousness before God and with the joy you had. So what if you could do an experiment? What if you would know exactly what that would look like to make a marriage thrive? What if you could follow 125 couples that just got married? How many of you saw a depressed or disaster marriage on a wedding day? What do you see on a wedding day? You see glowing faces. You see joy. You see a desire to go forward in life. Now, what if you could follow 125 couples for 5 years, then figure out which ones of those couples are committed and happily married 5 years later, and which one of those couples are miserable or divorced? And then what if you could go back and look for little things that made all the difference? A researcher by the name of Dr. John Gottman did just this. He recorded 125 couples hanging out for a weekend, and all their interactions. And then 5 years later, they checked in on all of them, and they found out that some were divorced, some were miserable, and others were thriving and happy. And they looked back, they played the tape back looking for the thread of what made the difference. And you know what? It wasn't super profound. But the two stories that stand out, to give you an example of what they saw as they're looking, take this one scenario. A lady in the kitchen, and her husband's on the couch watching TV, and she floats out this question from the kitchen. Hey, would you want to play checkers? And her husband says, yeah, let's play some checkers. And he turns off the TV. Guess what? This couple is 5 years later, happy and thriving. Another instance, a lady steps out on the porch and the sun's coming down on her, and she just comments back to her husband who's watching TV with a bowl of cereal in his hand, a real man. and she says, it's a beautiful day out here. You know what the man does? Crunch, crunch, another bite of cereal as he looks at his TV. Not even a grunt of recognition. A second time. Boy, it sure is nice out here. Silence on his part. A third time. Silence, and then she goes silent. They looked at that and they studied those different interactions, and they saw that there is a scientifically verifiable thing that you can identify that's going to set the course for a marriage to either thrive or eventually be miserable or fall apart. And the language that they came up with for that was bids for connection. A bid for connection. And whether that bid for connection by one spouse is answered by the other spouse in a good positive way or not.
So Dr. John Gottman did a lot of research out of this study, and they came up, well, first they said, let's clarify exactly what is a bid for connection. And they say a bid for connection is an attempt to get attention, affection, or acceptance. It could be something real simple as it's a beautiful day out there, or do you want to play checkers? But it was that bid for connection or affection or acceptance. Out of this study, there was some huge statistical differences between the couples who 5 years later were divorced or very unhappy in their marriage, or the couples that were happily married. Those who responded to those bids only about 33% of the time. The Gottmans kind of classified as the disasters of marriage. And those who responded 87% of the time, not 100%, but 87% of the time to those bids, they kind of put in that masters of marriage group. And those marriages were happily married. And so as you think of bids for connection, those bids that are put out for acceptance or affection or attention. The couples out of that study, 87% of the time were responding to the spouse's bid.
James 1:19, the wisdom of James 1:19, men, I'm going to give this to you. Be quick to listen. Be quick to listen. Sometimes those things can just get missed if we're not paying attention. But have your ear, both of your ears, tuned towards your wife in the home. What is she saying? What is she asking for? What signal is she sending? Is there a bid for connection? Because you want to be able to master that. 87% of the time or more respond when she makes one. If you let it go and you think it's not a big deal and she should get over it, you are mistaken. You are mistaken. A sacred unity that God has put together and intended to thrive is starting to erode on your watch. If you're going to be protective of her, you're going to listen. Listen. Listen.
And Ephesians 4:12 says, be kind and compassionate to one another. In order to hear your spouse's bid and respond to that, there has to be compassion. There has to be kindness towards your spouse.
I know that life can get busy, but these are like simple moments that happen every day that we either take the moment and build a little building block of a thriving marriage, or we miss the opportunity. Simple moments every single day can be a building block. So our encouragement to you is don't miss them. When there's attention grabbers, you want to pay attention.
For us, some of the most obvious bids that happen in our house are, hey, do you want to go for a walk? It's an obvious question. Hey, do you want to come do something with me? Or could we have a date night this next week or the next week? How was work today? Just a simple question. How are you doing? How was your work day? Those are pretty obvious bids that happen in our house.
And then there's some more subtle, like, hey, look at the deer outside. Is that just a comment you're making? Or do you really want me to weigh in on deer when we've seen them 100 times? Guess what? If you're saying it out loud to me, you want me to notice it. Even if that's neat, I'm at least responding. Even if I'm not getting up and running and looking out the window. Or, hey, did you see that bird? Or, here's one that I hear sometimes. Is the coffee done, babe? Translation, could you pour me a cup and bring it to me while I'm wrapped in a blanket with my journal and Bible? Because if you get really good at listening to bids, you understand that sometimes the bid is just a surface gesture for something that's even deeper. It might not even be exactly what's said. There might be something more that's really meaningful and really will enrich your marriage. Or one that I make sometimes, hey, I'm going to watch some highlights from the basketball game. I remember actually patting the couch one time saying, do you want to come sit beside me? Not because I think she loves basketball, but because I think she loves me. And it would mean something to me if she would come sit beside me while we'd watch around the highlights.
There are also nonverbal bids that people can put out. If your spouse walks by and gives you a squeeze or wants a hug or a kiss before they walk out the door, facial expressions can be a bid for connection as well. Making eye contact across the room, or just vocalizing, laughing at someone's joke, letting them know that you've heard what they've said.
Can you imagine the number of bids, if you really start thinking about it, that could be made? It's almost infinite. There's, early in our marriage, cupboard doors close 1,000 times, right? Do you open and close the cupboard doors? Well, there was one Saturday where I was relaxing on the couch, and the cupboard doors closed just a little harder than usual. And at first you think, the cupboard doors are closing, that's fine. Then you're like, there's another one, harder than usual. There's something else going on here. There's a bid for connection. If you start thinking that way about the little things, and maybe somebody rolls their eyes, or you hear a sigh, they're telling you something that's going on inside of them. And if you're not emotionally exhausted, you'll be able to say, what's happening for you? What are you thinking about? What's going on? How can I help? Because if you come home from the office or from an intense thing in ministry, and your spouse has been through an intense day at the house taking care of the kids and managing things there, if you're both on low emotional tanks, your tendency is not going to be able to be is to support each other. You've got to find a way to keep those tanks filled with the Lord and support each other, and then be able to respond to these bids for connection. So when your spouse makes a bid for a connection, every time, no matter how small or little or big, it's a chance for your marriage to thrive. Men, I especially give this as a challenge to you. It's a chance, there's a pitch coming at you. It's a chance for you to connect and hit that ball and build something beautiful in your marriage. Even if it's not first nature to you, it doesn't have to be. You can learn this skill. It's simple as acknowledging, accepting, and responding. So we've presented some information with maybe new language. So we wanted to pause here and say, are there any questions about what we mean when we say a bid? Does that make sense? Y'all are staying awake. I'm impressed. Any questions about what we've said so far before we have a question for you in a breakout? Always been good at this? No.
Take, for example, the cupboards slamming.
Yeah, and I still to this moment have days where I come home and I'm spaced out and she has to nudge me to say, hey, somebody's making a bid, or remind me that she is. But what we've learned is that we have to get to a place where we can be good at it. Any basketball players? I like basketball, and if you're shooting 80% in the free throw line, it's pretty decent. It's kind of like that in marriage. Nobody's perfect, but your goal is to aim higher. Good question. Any other questions? Okay, we got a breakout question for you.
So if you could just get in groups of 3 or 4, maybe discuss what would be some common obstacles for recognizing bids. What are some common obstacles for marriages to recognize a bid?
Yes, and not everybody here is with their spouse, so some of you are going to be third wheeling. That's just fine. You could talk about marriage in general. What do you think are the challenges that society brings today for marriages to respond to bids? If you want to share personally, you can do that. But yeah, just get in groups of 3 or 4.
Take about 5 minutes.
Take about 5 minutes, and then we'd love to hear your thoughts back to the group. We just got to book on Sabbath, yeah. We just got to book on Sabbath. Sounds like good conversations are happening. How are you feeling about stepping in and out story? I think we just need to fully step out and not fully step in. Because we can't do something so the mic doesn't pick it up. Could we ask somebody for the mic? Mic choice, good. It is choppy though. ask a Sabbath day question. Like, what's the closest thing you have to Sabbath?
Yeah,
The closest thing.
I'll leave that up to you.
Yeah. And I think that when we should really talk about how we didn't have that. If we didn't have that for a few years ago, we thought it was so. Yeah, that's great. That's great. Should just ask somebody where the nearest gas station is at the end. That would be a good way to end it. Do you think we have more single men here, or is it women without businesses? Hold on, at least till 20. Oh, I'm looking at the hour hand. What time did we start? What time did we start? I know, but what time did we start? The 5 minutes. I was looking at the hour hand. I'm like, what's that? We are 5 minutes in? Okay.
You could give me a 30-second wrap up.
All right. If anybody hasn't had a chance, 30 seconds to wrap up your conversations. Make sure everybody's got a chance to say what they're thinking. All right. We'd love to hear back from you. If there's someone from your group who wants to share, we have time to hear from a few groups. What do you see as the big challenges for marriages today in responding to bids? And I'll just repeat them. You say them and I'll repeat them out so everybody can hear. Kids. That's huge. Kids. It was one thing when you got married and all you had was each other, and then there's suddenly wonderful 3 or 4 others, and they all need things. And they are not quite as patient. Yeah, good. Cell phones. Cell phones, that's a really good one. You know, I saw a speaker once say, he was like talking, and then he like did this. And so I'll ask you, how many of you still feel like you are important right now as I'm talking to you? Because this, we all know what this is. That means you can go anywhere in the world, talk to anybody in the world, think about anything in the world. So cell phones, that's a good one. Big obstacle. What else?
How do you handle when you rely on your spouse to fill your emotional tank and their tank is on empty as well?
Oh, that's the worst. That is the worst. So yes, the problem when you're both empty. For us, we've just found out we have to take responsibility for our own tank. Like at that point, like somebody's taking a hot bath, somebody's going for a run, will stagger the times away from the home. Like if you need alone time and I need alone time, well, we can't both do that at the same time. So you take your alone time, then I'll take my alone time. So you work together, but each person. That's a good one. When you're both emotionally low. Somebody else had a hand up.
I think it goes along with that belief that you're not allowed to say no because you're in ministry, and so you don't know how to set boundaries, and then you're just absolutely exhausted, and there's just nothing left. You hear the bit, but you just can't respond to it.
Yes, another one. Weariness and lack of boundaries in ministry that contributes to that weariness. Huge obstacle. You guys are doing great.
God brings opposites together. And you have very different needs and personalities.
Yes.
Introvert versus extrovert. Introvert needs time while the extrovert's always.
That's That's really good. Yes, when you have different personalities, introvert, extrovert, and God brought that together, that creates unique challenges to answering bids for connection.
One thing we talked about a little bit, when is your approach to giving a bid inappropriate? Slamming the door too hard. And you threw that illustration out there, I'm not picking on her.
But and my negative emotions though in a bid are not necessary. Your point is there's a good way and a healthy way to express a bid, but you can expect someone low in emotional tank to do that. So like if she asked me to do something when I just walked in the door and I go, because I'm exhausted, then we have to take that as learning. We can't take that as, if she views that as like, you don't want to help around the house, guess what we're doing? We're suddenly fighting each other. But if she views that as, he must be really tired, and I look at her and see she must be really tired, and then we come together and say, how can we get refreshment? Because we are for each other. I say this to couples over and over. When you're solving problems together in marriage, with the Lord's help, there's nothing that'll stop you. If you start to see yourself, see your spouse as the problem, there's nothing going to save you. You need to work together. Even if it's a negative emotion, we're not going to be perfect. But it's a valid thing to think about, and you want to work at that. It sure makes it easier if you come home and say, babe, I'm really tired. Could I go for a run to refresh before you tell me how your day was? But it's an obstacle for sure. Anybody else? Yeah.
Did you say that again? If the people were against each other, they cannot be saved?
Oh, I said that if you're with your spouse and you're with the Lord and you're seeing problems to solve together with the Lord's help, nothing will stop you. If you have switched and you think your spouse is the problem, nothing will save you. Yeah. Yes, sir.
This is tagging on the personality thing a little bit, but recognizing the different love languages. You talked about the idea that my love language isn't my wife's, and so what fills my tank up isn't going to fill hers up. And just understanding that, being aware that rarely, well, I'll use the term rarely, but not often at the same time are both of us getting our tanks filled up in the same activity or in the same bid. That we need to just be aware that I don't want to just completely drain her all of the time, and she shouldn't want to completely drain me all the time, but it works together.
Yeah. So getting in that, I love what you said about love languages, touch, quality time, words of affirmation, gifts, acts of service, the one I always forget because it's pretty down low for me. Yeah, and if you have differences there, it takes being even more intentional to speak your spouse's love language. But you'll find the more you speak theirs, as Christ loved the church and gave his life for the church, the more their emotional tank will be full where they'll be able to speak yours if you can express how that would be meaningfully felt. And sometimes you just have to say it, You can't read each other's minds. You just have to say it, which is where we're going to go next. One more obstacle, though. Anybody else dying to say something? Dying, that's a bad word. No, living. You're living and you want to say something. Yes, thank you. Selfishness is a huge obstacle. That's right. Selfishness and pride. It reminds me of a lady who was on vacation in Mexico at a resort, speaking English as she was, and one of the people serving the table didn't speak English, and by all accounts, she said to those nearby, "If these people want to come here, why don't they learn our language?" Wait a minute. Talk about selfishness and pride, right? And the same thing I think can happen in marriage. If this person wants to live with me, why don't they learn my love language? No, that's not the point of a love language. The point of love language is learn how to love and serve your spouse. Speak their language. Okay.
Going into
So we want to pivot a little bit and get into thinking intentionally. So these bids, if they're just lobbed out there, you may or may not get them. But what if you thought about your day with intention? That there's key times each day to respond to bids. Think about the mornings, for example. What would it look like for you to have a plan to make a bid with your spouse and for them to know what that bid would be and respond to it? Early on, my plan to connect in our marriage was to talk with my wife immediately in the morning.
I always thought I was an early morning person until we got married. True story. He will wake up singing, like loudly, just happy to be alive.
It's true. And I just assumed everybody was like that until I lived with her and found out that if you greet your neighbor too loudly in the morning, it may be taken as a curse. So it took me a few years to tone that down, my expectation, right? To think, okay, I know what I'm like, but now this is what she's like. And there was one morning where I felt particularly triumphant because I wanted to say something. I wanted to say something loudly. I was so happy to see her. And I just held it to this really big smile. And she looked at me and said, "It's too early to smile like that." So I have a lot of early morning meetings at work now. And I just want to say that, like, this is something we learn over the years, right? You keep learning. So it goes a lot better, bid for connection, if I'm at the house, which I rarely am, at 6:30 or 7 in the morning when she wakes up. Starting with a hot cup of coffee, giving her time to enjoy that, and I can have quiet time, and then we start to discuss. It just goes a lot better. So what's your morning ritual of connection with your spouse if you're at home? Do you see each other? Are you intentional? Is there some bid for connection that is made and responded to?
One thing that we put into practice in our marriage probably 6 years ago was something called a rings chat. And so if you're a note taker and want to write down this acronym, this is something that we adapted probably 6 years ago, and our conflicts probably went down 80% after we did this. But we just said we want to have an intentional connection point every single day where we can hear how each other are doing and meet each other's needs. And so the acronym is RINGS, RINGS, and each of those letters stands for something. R stands for real. It's just a moment for you to say how you're really doing. So every day, at some point, we ask each other, how are you really doing today? And it's just a safe place for the other person to say where that emotional tank is. If it's down at 10%, it's a safe place to say it. If they're at 80%, I want to know, and I want to know how the emotions and the heart of my spouse is doing.
That's a great, safe structure to just listen to each other. After the R, being real, is I, information. And that's a simple question, like, what are your plans for today? And that simple question reduced our conflict significantly. Like, I now know in my head, I'm like, one plan for today is to get gas in the van when we leave this place. And I didn't have that expectation before. And a very simple definition of conflict is just two different expectations colliding. But if you find out at the start of the day or even by midday what your spouse is expecting the rest of the day, their plans are, then the odds of you having a collision of expectations is just diminished significantly. And then you can plan. Now that you know how they feel, you can make a plan for the day that involves what they need as well as all the things that need their attention.
The next letter is N, and that stands for needs. What needs do you have today? And going back to what you said about love languages, this is one space where if we're having a rings chat and one of us feels the need to say, hey, I need, for Preston, his highest love language is words of affirmation, which I can sometimes just glaze over and keep going. But sometimes he'll say, hey, I need some words of affirmation on what happened the other day. And it opens up my eyes to see what his need is for that day and to be able to meet it.
And she might tell me that she needs a gift at times. Amazon, gentlemen, Amazon. We have no excuse. It's one of the gifts of technology. Gifts for her. Click, click, click in the cart. It's on the way. Gifts is my lowest love language. It's her highest. So again, there's a work in progress at getting together on what those are. So real, and then information, N is need, and then G is grateful. Grateful. What is it in your spouse's heart that they're grateful for? And I believe this isn't just a relational discipline. This is actually a spiritual one. Because if you read through the Psalms, you'll see that the psalmists lament all kinds of feelings, the very worst: anger, sadness, frustration, but they all come back to one thing: praise. Lord is faithful. We can be grateful. And so when you go through this, getting to the grateful one is always one that I love, because it reminds us of what God has given us. And we thank him for it. And we share with each other what's on our mind. But sometimes your spouse is going through the whole day and you have no idea what they're grateful for in their heart. And this little conversation, it could be 5 minutes, it could be an hour, however long you want it to be, you can find out what they're feeling grateful for today.
The last letter is S, and it stands for someday. Basically, what are you looking forward to? It's a little chance to either dream together or ask your spouse what they're looking forward to. And just like Preston said, there's some days when he'll sit down and say, hey, I have 10 minutes before I have to get out the door. Let's do a quick rings chat, and we'll just go through those in 10 minutes. There's other days when I wake up and he's already gone, and I might get a text from him later that day with RINGS and just briefly letting me know kind of how he's doing that day, what he might need that evening after he gets home from work. Sometimes he can look ahead on his schedule and say, I'm having some heavy meetings today, so when I get home, I need to run right away before dinner. So could we have a later dinner or something like that? Just a chance to touch base every day.
And a few rules we have for a good conversation space, we like to make those a phone-free zone. When you have a rings chat, put away the phone, have a distraction-free focus time, have a favorite place, and have a favorite drink. If you like coffee, if you like hot chocolate, if you like tea. And if you don't get together in the morning, maybe you can get together at lunch. If you don't get together at lunch, maybe get together in the evening. And if you can't get together in the evening, maybe you just have a little chat before you fall asleep at night. But I really believe that anybody can do this. It's a very helpful tool. And if you do it, you'll be building in a place in your day where your bids are sent and responded to, and your overall percentage is going to go way up. Okay, so we've got good mornings, we've got a rings chat, so this conversation could be you put it in the time of day works best for you. Then we want to talk about goodbyes. How many times do you say goodbye to your spouse in a day? Did you ever think of that? Now, how often have you said goodbye before you stop saying goodbye like you used to say goodbye? Can you remember the first time you kissed her? I do. And it was sparks, man. And so 15 years in, if I'm just kissing her and going out the door and my mind's somewhere else, then I'm missing something. So here's a little tip. When you say goodbye, kiss her like you were kissing her for the first time. Let that replay in your mind. Become fully present. And don't just rush out the door with a peck on the cheek. Really kiss her. You never thought you'd hear that say at pastor's conference, did you? But make your goodbyes a moment that matters.
And another thing that I would put in there with intentionality is just pausing to make eye contact, not yelling, see you later, from another room, but just pausing. For me, it's pausing whatever I'm doing, giving him an intentional goodbye, have a good day. It only takes 20 seconds to send him out the door, but that eye contact is a way of giving and receiving a bid as you're sending someone out the door.
And the next thing is greetings when you come back home. I used to make the mistake of coming back home with work with me. I was still on the phone, walking in the door. I was still wrapping up an email. And she graciously told me how that was impacting our family, and I learned from that, this isn't good. You're right, so if I'm on a phone call, I'll stay in my car, literally, until my phone call's over, and I turn off the phone, put it in my pocket, and then I walk in the door, and I'm ready to be present with my family. What's it like for you when you get home from work? Is that an intentional moment where you can send and respond to each other these bids? Because that, again, is a place to think about getting your percentage up.
Knowing your spouse's love language in that welcoming moment when they come through the door is also another way to just make a welcome home extra special. So if it's words, asking them how their day was, if their love language is touch, giving them a hug when they come through the door. If it's service, finding out if there's anything they need. Just a way of like knowing your spouse and meeting that need in that welcome home moment.
And just so you know, you can get better at this. There was a day last week where I heard a sigh as she was going to make dinner. And it was just a very gentle sigh. You might have not even noticed. I wouldn't have noticed when 5 years into marriage, but I noticed, and I motivated myself to think, what's her love language? It's service. And why shouldn't I go out in the kitchen and offer to help? So I went out and said, hey, can I help make supper? What can I do? And you should have seen the smile that came over her face. And we had a great time making supper together, eating supper together, because the thing with a bid is whenever your spouse is looking for connection, affection, or anything, and you can respond with their love language, it is a powerful moment that will build thriving. So we've got greetings, we've got the rings chat, we've got goodbyes. What about good nights? What's the last thing you say to your spouse before you go to sleep? A young man in our community, I watched him share at his wife's funeral. She died when they were about 12 years into marriage, leaving 3 children behind. And he stood in front of our church and talked about how meaningful life had been with her. And one thing that he said that I'll never forget is he said to everyone there who's married, just tell her you love her before you go to sleep every night, because you don't know how long you'll have each other. And it reminded me not to take for granted the fact that I get to lay down at night and go to sleep next to her. Because see, there's people in our lives we count on so much, sometimes we can start to take them for granted. And it won't always be that way. Our time here is limited. So when you go to sleep at night, tell her you love her.
Also, adding gratitude to the end of your day. As a family, often we'll gather the kids in the living room before we send everybody off to bed and spend some time in prayer. And oftentimes that's thanking God for the things that have happened in their lives or that day, or asking Him to be with people who are on our hearts, and just having prayer being a part of our good night moments together as a family, but also for our marriage.
So I want to invite you again to a quick breakout discussion. Now thinking about, we talked about the obstacles to bids for connection. What are the opportunities for marriages that you see daily to connect? So what are the opportunities for marriages daily to connect, to improve the percentage of response with bids of connection? Make sense? On the same page? Everybody's awake still. Only one yawn. So yeah, go back into groups, 3 or 4, and discuss what are the opportunities for daily connection. Maybe it's something you just heard, maybe it's an idea you have, but just take a little to share and digest. We should be done in 2 minutes. It's 2 minutes. So give them 2 minutes for that. And then we just got to hit weekly, annually, and fifth. Yeah. 1, 1, 1, 1.
Okay, then
All right. I love seeing the smiles across the sanctuary as you're talking about these opportunities. Keep these conversations going, maybe with your spouse on the way out of here. It just came to my attention that we have only 10 minutes left in this workshop, so we want to hit a few more things for you, then hopefully you'll keep digesting it. So the first thing you've thought about now that you understand this way we can build a thriving marriage by intentionally connecting, we've thought about daily things. These are all daily things. Now I want you to think about weekly. What does your schedule look like for a week? What about annually? What about every 5th anniversary? You know, what are you doing in the bigger picture of things? Eugene Peterson is a pastor, and he talked about how people would fill your schedule every hour of your calendar if you let them. He learned that. And so back to your point about boundaries, he started building himself some boundaries, which included reading time. So he would but how would you do that in a country that's so, like, the pastor should be available? You can't look at someone and say, I'm sorry, I'm reading at that time, I can't meet with you. So Peterson's tip was to write Dostoevsky or whoever he was reading on his calendar. And so then he would just look at his calendar and say, I'm sorry, my calendar's full. When we first decided on a day of the week that we wanted to take completely off, a day of rest, which we'll get to in a second, I remember the first meeting I was in where people were scheduling another meeting, and it came to that day, and I was like, oh no, I can't say I'm not available when all I'm going to be doing is being with my family. I have to be willing to be here because I'm the pastor. And then I remembered Peterson, and I looked at the calendar, and I said, my calendar's full. And nobody questioned that. And that was what Peterson suggested. He said, if you're going to be a pastor, and you're going to walk with God, and you're going to cultivate a life that has margin of imagination, you've got to put it on your calendar, and you've got to say, my calendar's full. That's really the art of boundaries, made very simple. Oh, yeah. So back to Sabbath. You just got a book on the Sabbath, which I didn't know was coming your way. But what does your day of rest look like in your week? Because we found in our early years of marriage and ministry, the day of rest was Sunday. Nobody's laughing. Have you ever preached on a day of rest, then spend the afternoon thinking about what you could have said better and talking to people? Yeah, so we started working at like exhaustion. And then finally I read a book by Peter Cesaro which suggested, and I don't know why I never thought about it before, he said pastors should really take a different day for their Sabbath day than Sunday. And so we took that and tried to apply it, but it was hard. It was really hard. But building the discipline of saying, we want the Sabbath day, we had to create a vision for our Sabbath day, and Peter's vision was a Sabbath day should feel like this. Not a day to catch up on all the other things you have let slide. A Sabbath day should be like a snow day. Do you remember that? How many of you got that call that school was canceled when you were a kid? I remember those calls. There was nothing like it. He said, if your heart doesn't sing towards what you've got on your calendar, then it's probably not a Sabbath. So as you think about a weekly pattern, imagine that, a whole day where you could rest, unless you have to milk the cows, Kyle. Cows don't rest, you got to milk the cows. But as much as possible, rest and be refreshed with your family and with God. In a way, if you look at Genesis and the 10 Commandments, I believe you could even see the Sabbath day itself as God's bid for connection with us. He's saying, take a day. It's holy, set apart for your relationship with me. And how beautiful if we can build that into our calendars in a weekly rhythm. This is the day of rest. This is the day with God. This is the day to be fully present.
The other thing that we found is a weekly date connection of some sort. And there's been seasons in our life when finding childcare was a little more tricky to have like a weekly date, but we would set aside a block of time and say, if it was Tuesday evening, and say, if we can get childcare, we'll go do something, a hobby that we both enjoy, whether that's hiking or maybe trying some food truck down the road or something. But if we couldn't, then we would put the kids to bed early and do an in-house date if we could. And just taking that time, setting aside a weekly chunk of time that says we're going to set aside all the finance things that we're talking about or parenting issues or whatever it is, and we're going to connect, just the two of us, and have some fun weekly.
Another thing we've done annually is try to get away on a retreat of some kind. There's something about driving out of town, even being here at Pastors Conference, right? Driving through the mountains of Virginia and getting here, it's like, this is good. You can, for myself, I can unwind a little bit and be refreshed just by getting out of town and getting in a place where we leave some of those things behind. And if you look at the example of Jesus in the New Testament, what's happening sometimes? People are looking for him, and where is he? He doesn't seem too worried about what people think because he's out connecting with his Father. He's going away for prayer. He's getting up early and leaving because he was never about like convincing everyone that he was doing everything that they thought he should do. He was about walking relationship with the Father and then doing ministry out of the overflow of that, not on empty. So when you think about a weekly Sabbath, think about a weekly date night, think about also an annual something, and Pastors Conference may be that for you. Or maybe there's something else you want to do that refreshes you. We found places like The Cove. Have you all heard of The Cove in South Carolina? North Carolina, thank you. That's a Billy Graham sponsors that. You can go there for 4-star meals and really great input and beautiful hiking trails for 2 nights for $50. Because people believe in what you're doing as pastors, and they donate. They make it possible. They want pastors' spouses to be able to get away. They understand the things we're talking about here. There's a place like the Springs in Indiana, which is near where we live, about 2.5 hours away, dedicated for prayer and spiritual retreats. And going there and just sitting in silence, man, there's nothing like it to be refreshed and refilled. There's a place called Beside Still Waters in Florida, which is on the Rosedale Network website. We were just there this winter where you can go and stay for, $250 donation for up to 10 nights on an island in Florida. And you feel like you're an imposter because everybody there's really rich, and you're like, what are we doing here? But it's just a walk to the ocean. And being there is like so soul refreshing. And the place is dedicated for people like us. And if we can master the art of boundaries and master the art of looking out at our calendar, we can actually find these places. Like I look at it as God's provision for us to have a place of rest and refreshment and a place of coming close to God.
With all of those retreat places, there's often logistical stuff or paperwork. So just as you think of those annual retreats or annual getaways, I would say look at your calendar 9 months or 12 months out and start applying for some of those places or putting it on your own calendar and getting your paperwork in. If you do have any questions, it's kind of I love finding those kind of places, and I'd love to give you any tips if you have questions. But looking out on the calendar, your own calendar, the place you're going, that calendar, and then also your church calendar, because you're obviously, probably many of you are preaching or on that preaching schedule. So if you need to line up guest speaking to be gone, if you're getting on it 9 to 12 months out, that can really make it possible.
I would have been to 0 of these places without her, if you can't tell. I barely get the trash out without her. I'm very much in my head an ideas person, and she's really good at implementing things. The last point we're going to make is 5th anniversary. So this is something we've done. When we got married, we said, hey, when we go to a nursing home one day, if that happens, we want to have a photo album full of memories. And we're not making a whole lot of money. But if we put $60 every month into a savings account, what is that up to in 3 years? 5 years. I have no idea. But it adds up to something. And we'll take whatever that is and we'll do something special. So our 5th anniversary we went to Ireland, our 10th anniversary we went to Tennessee, and our 15th anniversary is this year, and I have no idea where we're going yet. But it's going to be somewhere special. And if you think out like that, like how many decades does God give us together to journey with our spouses? Plan out even farther. Think big. What memories do you want to make together? Don't wait to do them. One financial advisor I heard say, saw a man and his wife save up tons of money. They were going to be financially independent, travel the world. and he's 55, 56 years old, and she gets cancer and dies. And he said, now what am I supposed to do? Because nothing is meaningful without her. What you have, the person you have next to you is God's great gift to you in the covenant of marriage. Cherish it. Don't wait to make memories. Go for it. Build a marriage that thrives.
I just think it's so beautiful that marriage is the place where God points to describe what his relationship with the church is like. Ephesians 5:25, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. Timothy Keller has a book called The Meaning of Marriage, and in there he has a beautiful quote about marriage, and it says, to be loved and not known is superficial. To be known and not loved is our greatest fear. But to be fully known and fully loved as we are, well, that's a lot like being loved by God. And I just think how in our marriages, as we're giving and receiving those bids for connection, that bid to be known and to be loved as we are, it's that replaying of the gospel over and over again, because that's what God has done for us. He knows us fully as we are, and yet he loves us fully as we are. And what a beautiful picture in marriage that we get to live that out in every bid for connection, that the reality of the gospel gets played out in our marriages.
So to wrap it up, be intentional in your marriage. Be available in your marriage. Be grateful for your marriage. And even more than that, be grateful for the grace that God has given you in Jesus Christ and your chance to display that grace, the person who wakes up to you every morning, goes to sleep next to you every night. Go in peace. We're going to go get some gas in the Honda Odyssey. Thanks for joining us this afternoon.